everyone. So glad to see you, and I'm hoping more folks will join us. But how cool that SASA is also on YouTube Live. And we love it when a lot of you guys tune in to YouTube also. My name is Sue Kuentz, and I am the San Antonio Storytellers Association president. But we have other SASA members here tonight, and we have folks from outside our state here tonight that we are just elated to have. And boy, has it been a summer. It's just been up and down like a roller coaster ride. So what I thought would be kind of fun is to toast to stories, toast to what we know will empower us to move forward. Good, bad, ugly, stories will move us forward. And so I think my first toast will go by us all raising our cups of our favorite drinks, whatever you might have in your hand. And I'm going to say, cheers. May the hinges of our stories never grow rusty.
Cheers.
Cheers.
We begin our summer storytelling sessions with just a quick workshop of 5 minutes or less. And tonight we have the phenomenal John Hale, and he is a San Antonio storyteller, a member and board member. And he has something very cool that I know we'll all take something away with. So go for it, John.
Okay, so if everybody else can mute yourself, so we don't have any kinds of dog barking interruption or anything like that. We all have some stories to share. It doesn't have to be a fairy tale or a fictional piece or a historical piece. It can be right out of your life. This is something that I found that I have a lot of success with as I teach teamwork, leadership, and safety in construction by using a lot of my own personal stories. So I found a list that was really cool of conversational starters, those little ideas and prompts that help you think about interesting things in your life. Sue mentioned that you might get them from your parents or from other people, and that's always fun to have a little family history. So as I read through these story prompts and these conversational starters, what I came up with is I started making a list, and I called it my story seed list. Oh, I guess you can't see it. I got to go off of the blur, right? There we go. Well, still can't see it. Anyways, on my list, on my tablet, I started just writing these ideas, little stories maybe I had told over time, or maybe I was teaching a class and I thought, oh, here's a perfect little incident, a little something to share. And it made for a fun story. It was dynamic, but generally 45 seconds, a minute and a half, just something fun. And it makes for some great stories. And then some later on, you can actually develop into much more. And last couple months, we've had several people share their travel log and maybe an incident that very specific that made for a really fun thing. And one of the best ones is I would interview my mom. She passed away this last year. And the last few months, as she started to kind of just lose some of her mental faculties and things, I was able to eke out some of these stories. And sometimes she'd be telling me something and I'd say, oh my gosh, Mom, that's a perfect story. And literally from beginning to end, she had it perfectly planned. And they're not always that way. Sometimes you got to tweak it and work it a little bit. Sometimes you find a punchline from a story type joke that is perfect for one of your own experiences. And it makes for a great personal story with that great punchline that applies. So I want to encourage you to find some story prompts, some conversation starters, and start to make your story list that you can use in many situations.
That's excellent, John. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and here we go. All right. Now, if anybody wants to make comments to John, anything you want to add to what he said, please feel free to do that down in the chat. And that would be fantastic. So let's see here. John, I'm going to let you take over the Zoom piece of it. I'm not sure how to do the rest of this. I'm going to move on to our next storyteller, Veronica Gard. She, thank goodness, is with the San Antonio Storytellers Association. In fact, she's on our board. She is our secretary. And I'm not sure what we would do without her being our secretary and adding her wonderful thoughts to all of our meetings. Not only that, she has fantastic stories. Even though she's been here for quite a few years, England is her home, and she gets to visit often. And she has a fantastic story about the Queen of England. So take it away, Veronica.
Okay, well, as you probably all know, the Queen's been celebrating her 70th anniversary of being the Queen, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. And they've had all sorts of fun and games over in England, which many of which I watched, and I hope you did too, because they were amazing, just amazing. It made me think about an occasion when my parents met the Queen. And I have a photograph, and I don't know if I can get it so that you can see it, but I hope I can. How's that?
Perfect.
Yeah. Can you see that? The lady curtsying to the Queen is my mother, and the man next to her, rather tall, with glasses, is my father. And this was in 1954. I thought it was later, but it's 1954. And it was the occasion of the royal film performance, which they used to have. And every year there would be a film chosen, and the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, and in this case, Princess Margaret also would come, and people would be introduced, and it was all rather special. And it made the film, the world of the film, feel very important. Now, my father at that time was working at the Empire Theatre, which is a big film theatre in London, in Leicester Square. And he was in charge of the publicity. So, of course, he was very involved when the Queen was going to come to visit. But the trouble was, somebody, who I don't know, chose the film Beau Brummel. Now, Beau Brummel was a not very special person in the 17th century. 18th century. He was a friend of the almost king. King George III was still on the throne, but he was, getting a little strange. And his son, who then later became King George IV, was a great friend of Beau Brummel's. And they used to wear extraordinary clothes, and they behaved really rather badly most of the time. And of course, King George III was suffering, poor man, from porphyria. So he was really, out of his mind. They chose this film to show the Queen. And, George III, George IV are all her relatives, all her background. So anyway, the picture you saw of her being introduced to people was done before the film was shown, because after the film was shown, she swept out. She just swept out of the theatre. She looked at nobody. She spoke to nobody. She was livid. And, they never had another British film performance after that for the Queen. She just refused. Who chose the film? I can't imagine it. But anyway, I thought it was rather a good story. But in the picture you saw, My mother looks very special, I think, because the fact is she probably made that dress that she's wearing. I don't know if you can see it. It's really a lovely dress. And she probably made it because she made most of her dresses, made all mine. And everything looks so good. You know, the Queen's so happy and everybody's pleased. And then she sees the film and boom, out she goes. So that was that. So that's my story for today. There you go.
Bravo. Thank you so much. And what a beautiful, beautiful archived picture of your mom and your handsome dad.
I know. Yeah,
and the Queen. Oh, my word.
And the Queen, looking very, very young. I mean, she 1952, 1954. She'd only been on the throne since 1952. 53, she was crowned. So she'd barely, she barely got on the throne, really. She was a very young queen at that time. So who on earth decided to choose that particular film, which did not show her relatives in any good light?
No. Well,
I
I think we all need to raise our glasses because Judi Tarowsky has a wonderful, very appropriate cheer for this moment.
Through the teeth and over the gums, look out stomach, here it comes. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Yes. All right.
Cheers.
Thank you so much. All right, well, we're going to move right on over to Jamie Blount, who's from, I believe, North Carolina, right, Jamie?
Been here for 6 years now. So.
Yep. Jamie used to be part of our San Antonio Storytellers and has moved on over there, and I'm sure he's loving every minute of it. It's beautiful country, I know, and we're just glad he's carrying on with us through Zoom. So you got the stage, Jamie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, just a little while ago, Veronica talked about 1952 and how this is the anniversary of the Queen's coronation. Well, I'd like to talk about 1972. That's the year I graduated from college. Okay, I graduated from the University of Baltimore in June of 1972. And like many, many college graduates in that era, I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do in life than man the moon. But what I did want to do is I wanted to go to Europe and bum around for the summer. So I worked and saved some money, took advantage of the youth fare they used to have on the airlines. I flew from Baltimore, Maryland to Europe for a very, very cheap price. And I got a Eurail pass. I got the youth Eurail pass so I could travel around Europe for a month, I think for about $130 for the whole month. Of course, it was second class, but still I got to see a lot of places. And I really had some very wonderful experiences while I was over there that summer. It's one of the most wonderful summers of my life. And I wouldn't begin to tell you all those adventures that I had in this evening, but I would like to share with you one that was very, very memorable to me. When I was in Europe, I did a lot of hitchhiking in addition to riding the train. The train was good for just so long. And I also hitchhiked quite a lot when I was in England and Scotland as well. Well, I hitchhiked from London up to Glasgow, Scotland. Glasgow at that time was not the Glasgow that it is today. Glasgow today is a very, very wonderful place of urban renewal and rejuvenation. And at that particular time when I was there in 1972, it was a so-called Rust Belt city with old buildings crumbling down, chronic unemployment, housing problems, crime problems. And I really didn't pick the nicest place to go in Scotland. I picked sort of the underbelly of Scotland, if you will. Well, fortunately, I went back many years later and found that it had much improved. It's a beehive of activity right now. But at that particular time, I sort of saw it at a very difficult time, if you will. Well, I bummed around Edinburgh, or I bummed around Glasgow for a few days. And then one evening I set out on the road to hitchhike from Glasgow to Edinburgh. which is on the other side of the island. So I waited and waited and waited and waited, and finally got picked up. I didn't get to go as far as I wanted to go, but I did get to go a little bit of the ways. And I just remember the man who picked me up was very sympathetic to my need for a ride. And he said to me, I hope that when you go back home, that you'll speak well of us in our country. I said, I'm sure I will. Thank you very much for the ride. So I got back and I was on the road. Let me back up. I was on a secondary road when I hitchhiked. To hitchhike on the main roads is illegal. Well, I was hitchhiking on the secondary road and nobody picked me up. It was getting dark. And I thought, what the heck? I'll go down to the motorway. I think it was M5, if I'm not mistaken. I'll see if I can get a hitchhike down there. So I walked down the hill, down to the M5, and stuck up my thumb. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited. Nobody stopped. And I thought, well, the police might see me. If the police stop, they might take me into jail. Well, maybe the worst thing that'll happen is I'll sleep in jail, spend the night in jail. I don't know. What am I going to do? So anyway, so fortunately, as I was standing there waiting for a hitchhike, this minivan pulled over with two guys in it. And the guy next to me said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Edinburgh." He said, "Don't you know it's against the law to hitchhike on this road?" And I said, no, I didn't know that. Well, get in here, come on. So anyway, I climbed into the back and they said, "You didn't know that's illegal to hitchhike on these roads?" I said, "Well, no, I hitchhiked in the US and well, you're fortunate you get picked up by the police. Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Edinburgh." And "Where are you going to stay?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm sure I'll find it." You're going to Edinburgh and you don't know where you're going to stay? And I said, "No, but I mean, Edinburgh, it's a big city. I'm sure there are a lot of, hotels and bed and breakfasts and youth hostels and things like that." And I said, "Well, you'll never find a place there. Now it's late. We won't be getting there until about 11 o'clock tonight. So why don't you come and stay at my place?" And I was a little suspicious. I didn't know these guys. I thought, well, how am I going to handle this? So I said to the son, "Well, are you sure your wife will be okay with you bringing in a total stranger late at night?" "Oh, she won't mind. She won't mind. Believe me, she that's the last thing she's worried about." So I said, "Well, okay, if sure it's okay with her." What I was really feeling at the time was, I hope these guys aren't gay because I don't want to get involved in anything like that. So I thought, well, the driver, he's not gay. The guy with him, I don't think he's gay. So I think I'm okay. So anyway, the driver dropped off the fellow next to him at his house, and we said goodnight. And then he drove me over to his apartment in Edinburgh, got my rucksack and climbed up to the top of the stairs. And there was his wife to greet us. And Dougie, the fellow who drove and who invited me to his home, introduced me to his wife. And she welcomed me and told me to come in. And I said, "Have you had anything to eat?" And I said, "Oh, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Really, don't give it a second thought, And I was really quite hungry. And I think she kind of sensed that I was. So we sat down in the living room and had a beer and talked. And then later, his wife brought this enormous plate of food, hot, delicious, home cooked. Boy, was that good. So I ate every bite. And they said, "Well, you have a sleeping bag or anything?" I said, "Well, I have a kind of a bedroll." "Well, look, we have a sleeping bag. You can camp out here on our living room floor. And tomorrow morning, we'll take you downtown and let you bum around town and see what's going on downtown." So I thanked him profusely. And anyway, it got late. I guess I got to bed about 12:30. And they unrolled the sleeping bag and I slept in the sleeping bag. And the next morning, his wife got up and prepared a delicious breakfast for the both of us. And then I climbed into the van that he drove the night before. and he dropped me off downtown. And I went and bumped around town for the whole day, had a wonderful time. I went to the Edinburgh Castle and I walked along Princess Street and just had a wonderful, wonderful time enjoying myself there. And I had the fortune to take the bus out to the University of Edinburgh, where they were renting out student dormitory rooms to travelers for a pretty cheap price. So I was able to get a room all to myself, mind you, with breakfast in the morning. And so that's what I did the next morning. And then I hitchhiked out and I went up into Inverness, which is farther to the north of Scotland, and just really had a very, very wonderful time. And I found how friendly people were. I was a little afraid that because of a lot of the social disturbances in the USA and the Vietnam War, that maybe Americans weren't very popular. Then I learned, much to my surprise, that yes, Vietnam was not at all popular, and the disturbances we'd had were not popular in the minds of the people. But Americans, amazingly enough, were very well received. They were almost popular. But what I did notice, though, was that many, many young people at that time had a Canadian flag on their sleeve. Well, that was for two reasons. Number one, there were many Canadians who were being confused as being Americans, and they wanted to establish the fact they were Canadian, not American. And there were many Americans who also put a Canadian flag on their sleeve because they didn't want the Canadians to think they were American for fear they'd be berated about Vietnam or about some of the racial protests we'd had or things like that. But I chose not to go that route. I just went as an American and was okay with that. But what I just wanted to say was that this was an adventure that I really loved. I really loved going overseas and hitchhiking like that and meeting different people. And I can't think of anything in life that I really enjoyed more. Of course, there are risk factors involved too. You know, getting into the car with a total stranger is not without its risks, but fortunately I was okay in that regard. And I felt well received by the people there. And I was able to explore things and meet people that I perhaps wouldn't meet if I had taken a tour. So it was just a self-styled tour after I graduated from college. I know I didn't know what on earth I wanted to do in my life at that time, but I did know that I wanted to have a good time in Europe and in the UK. That's what I did. That's the end of my story.
That was wonderful. It's so wonderful to travel back in time with you and with all storytellers that shared, you shared 1972 with us. And it brings me back to 1972, and it probably brought everyone else on this Zoom back to that time. Unfortunately, I wasn't as brave as you, but to be able to hitchhike, or I should say, to be able to travel on my own to a foreign country must have just been so exciting. And yes, you met the nicest people.
Yeah, I sure did.
So thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, thank you, Sue.
Well, with that said, everyone raise your glasses of whatever you're drinking. And this toast comes from John Hale. May your traumas make for good stories as time goes by. Cheers. And the more I'm drinking, the more maybe I'll just be saying some more toasts. So if I'm out of line, just let me know. I'm kidding. So our next singer, songwriter, storyteller, and friend is Sue Young. And Sue is married now, and she's her and her partner are also fabulous duet singers. You could hear them online. I'm hoping that Sue will be able to let us know when they're sharing their songs out live in different locations here in Texas. She is amazing. She is a bilingual storyteller, and she's traveling all over Texas, I know for a fact, telling and singing songs for the kids in many of our libraries this summer with oceans of possibilities. But for Tonight, I believe she's going to be sharing a few songs with us. So let's give Sue Young hands up. Oh, Tim Tingle is coming. Here we go.
Thank you. All right. So I'm not, there I am. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share a couple of songs with you. This first song was inspired by an author, a San Antonio author I heard talking about her upcoming book. Her name is Alda P. Dobbs. And this is her book, Barefoot Dreams of Petroluna. And it's based on a story of her grandmother who fled Mexico during the Mexican Revolution as a girl, chased by the Federales, and wound up in Piedras Negras. And she and many, many other refugees were trying to get across the bridge. The soldiers were coming up on their heels, and they were pleading with the soldiers to let them across the bridge. And it turned out that it was a true story, and Alda researched it and wrote this book kind of loosely based on her grandmother. There's also a sequel of when her character, Petra, her heroine, winds up moving to San Antonio, and tells the story of the immigrants from the Civil War, refugees from the Civil War, and how they made their way in San Antonio. They're both fascinating and really good books. But anyway, I was so taken by that story of the, coming and being pursued by the Federales, trying to get across the bridge. And so I wrote this song called The Bridge. We come down from the mountains, dust under our feet, sun beating down on our backs, through prickly pear and mesquite. Men with guns are behind us, they are ruthless and cruel. Our lives to them are worth nothing, by fear and by power they rule. To the bridge we run, on the other side is promise and plenty and peace. To the bridge we run. We're carrying babies, songs and stories and dreams, the clothes on our backs, all that we've lived and we've seen. We carry our future, we carry our hope, standing now at the bank, river rushes below. To the bridge we run, on the other side is promise and plenty and peace. To the bridge we run. You who guard the gate, won't you open the way? To the bridge we run, on the other side is promise and plenty and peace. To the bridge we run, to the bridge we run. Thank you, and I have a toast. Arriba, abajo, al centro y adentro. And listening to those stories, that wonderful story about Scotland, I spent a year in South America, and I have a bunch of really, really interesting stories. I'd love to come back another time and tell some of those. But I'm going to do one more song for you right now. This is a song I wrote about something that I noticed about Texas. Y'all may have noticed the same thing. When I was a girl growing up in Texas, I dreamed all the places I would go. The green hills of Ireland, cafes of gay Paris, and those great walls walls of Jericho. I'd scale the pyramids of Egypt, the Acropolis in Athens, and tour the Roman ruins of Italy. I'd climb mountains to find a Swiss village in the Alps, and walk along the beach at Normandy. Around the world, around the world, I dreamed I'd go around the world. Around the world, around the world, I dreamed I'd go around the world. Then I met a handsome fellow who said that he would take me to London, Dublin, and to Tokyo. He said we'd stroll the streets of Sydney and prance in Puerto Rico. To Trinidad and Turkey we would go. Around the world, around the world. He said we'd go around the world. Around the world, around the world. He said we'd go around the world. Now this is the part where if I had my husband with me, he'd play a guitar break, but we're just gonna go right into the bridge. I packed my bags, I couldn't wait. He picked me up at 8:30. To my surprise, we began to drive and drive and drive and drive and drive. From a rodeo in Cairo to a do-si-do in Dublin. In Paris, we ate a chicken fried steak. That is not what I had in mind. We went wine tasting in Florence, line dancing in London, all without leaving the Lone Star State. Around the world, around the world. He said we went around the world. I'm not buying it. Around the world, around the world. He said we went around the world. We kind of went around the world, but it was all in Texas.
Yeehaw!
Thank you so
Woohoo!
much. If any of y'all are in Austin, my husband and I are playing Friday night at the Hyatt down on Barton Spring, off of Barton Springs, 6 to 8 p.m. down in the lobby.
6 to 8 p.m.
6 to 8 p.m. Yeah.
Barton Springs, Friday night.
Yeah, but it's at Barton Spring. You know, it's by the bridge where the bats come out. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And Sue, if you have a minute, put that into our chat so that the folks will know.
I will do that. Yes.
Thank you for sharing those books and that beautiful song you wrote also. Just phenomenal. I got goosebumps, and I know everyone else did too. So thank you so much. All right. So I did get another toast. So everybody, please raise your glasses. This is from Jim Kissane, and it is. May all your bank accounts be like the capital of Ireland, always Dublin. Cheers. All right. Our next storyteller is actually the very first person I thought of when I knew July was coming up. July 6th, I knew was coming up in June, like the week after our last storytelling night. And Judi Tarowsky just leaves stories in my mind every time I hear her. And thank goodness she's on Tim Tingle's Zoom once a month, or often, I should say, at least when I show up. And I love to hear her stories with the Dockmore Storytelling Guild. And I just noticed Tim jumped on board. So I hope Tim wants to share a story later on too. But you all, Judi is amazing. I wish she was here in Texas, but you know, she's just a hop, skip, and jump away in West Virginia. She tells tall tales, she tells true tales, Appalachian tales, and her personal tales are wonderful. Everything about Judi is amazing, and thank God I got to know her through Zoom. And I'm hoping you all will get to love her too as much as I do. So Judi, take it away.
Thank you, Sue. My goodness, what an introduction. Thank you. Well, this story is an original tale. It's kind of a mashup between a story by Max Samples, who is a great West Virginia writer and musician, and a story from Wales about the Tylwyth Teg, the little people, the fairies. So I put it together. I brought it into Appalachia because I figured it would get here soon enough anyway, and I call it Jacob and the Fiddler. Jacob Reed loved to go fox hunting. Now, I don't mean, with the red jackets and the white horses and the matching dogs. No, when Jacob Reed wanted to go fox hunting, he'd get his friends together on a warm summer evening, and they'd get their dogs together, and they'd get something good to eat and something good to drink. And they'd go up on the ridge where they had their favorite spot, they'd build a fire, and then everyone would just sit around and wait. And before long, there'd be the yip of a fox, and the dogs would be out on the chase, and they would run up and down the ridge for several hours just chasing that fox. Well, after a while, the fox would get tired of the chase, and the dogs would get tired of the chase. They would part as friends, and the fox would go home to his den, and the dogs would go back to their owners. Most of the time. Now, occasionally a dog would choose to stay out on the ridge all night, but his owner never worried because he knew that dog would be home in the morning in time for breakfast. Well, this one nice warm summer evening, Jacob wanted to go fox hunting, so he got his friends all together, and they got their dogs together, and they got something good to eat and something good to drink. And they went up on the ridge and built their fire and settled in to wait. And before long, there was the yip of a fox, and the dogs were off on the chase. And after several hours, the fox was tired of the chase, and the dogs were tired, so they parted as friends. The fox went home, and the dogs went back to their owners. Well, all except Jacob Reed's dog. He decided he'd stay out on that ridge for the rest of the evening. Now, ordinarily, Jacob would have let that dog stay out all night, but for some reason, this one night, he decided he'd go out and look for his dog. So he told his friends, he said, fellas, he said, now I'm going to go out and look for that fool dog. He says, you go on home. I'll be down home directly. They said, well, all right, Jacob, you suit yourself. So they went on down the hill to home, and Jacob set out across the ridge, calling and whistling for his dog, but with no results. Well, after a while, he came upon the meadow that was up on top of the ridge, and he was whistling and calling. And the mist was starting to settle in on the grass on the meadow. And he was whistling and calling with no luck until all of a sudden he heard, did you lose something, Sonny? Well, Jacob about jumped out of his skin, and he looked over, and there sitting on a rock was a strange little old man. He had on very rumpled trousers, a very rumpled vest, and a rumpled hat, and he was holding a cornstalk in one hand and a willow switch in the other. Did you lose something, Sonny? He said again. And Jacob said, well, yes, it's my dog. He hasn't come back. I was looking for him. Well, maybe my fiddle playing will bring him back. And Jacob looked at the little old man. He laughed. He said, he said, you're no fiddle player. Don't give me that with that cornstalk and that willow switch. No, old man, you're no fiddle player. Well, some folks say my fiddle playing can wake the dead. And he put that cornstalk under his chin and raised up that willow switch, and he started to play. Why, it was a fine fiddle tune, and Jacob found himself tapping his toe and listening. And then the fiddle player started up a little faster fiddle tune, and Jacob was enjoying it, and he looked out across the meadow because some movement caught his eye. And there, walking through the mist, was a woman, and he knew her. It was Aunt Ruby, and there were folks behind her, folks he knew. Why, there was Champ Coberly and Circe Wilson and Dennis Cunningham and other folks that he knew. And Then he remembered that the community church was just on the other side of the ridge with its graveyard. And those folks started walking toward him, and the fiddle player struck up a little faster fiddle tune. And all those people just started to dance right there in the meadow, just dancing around and around. And before long, there was Aunt Ruby standing right in front of Jacob. She says, "Oh, dance with me, Jacob. It's been 5 long years." So Jacob stepped forward and took Aunt Ruby into his arms, and they started to dance. And after a while, he looked at her, he says, "Oh, Aunt Ruby, this is like old times." And the fiddle player laughed. Jacob looked over, and as he watched, those rumpled trousers turned into woolly legs that ended in cloven hooves. That rumpled vest turned into a woolly chest. That rumpled hat turned into 2 horns. That cornstalk changed into a fiddle of fire, and that willow stitch changed into a lightning bolt of blue. And Jacob looked back to Aunt Ruby for some sort of explanation and found he was dancing with bones. And the fiddle player laughed. "Didn't I tell you, Jacob Reed, that my fiddle playing could wake the dead?" And he started up an even faster fiddle tune. And Jacob found himself caught up in this mad, whirling dance there in the meadow. It was a clacking, clattering cotillion, and he could not break free. The sun was just beginning to peep over the trees on the edge of the meadow, and the mist was starting to burn off the grass when Jacob's friends arrived there in the morning. And he could see him out there in the middle of the meadow, whirling around all by himself. And when he saw them, he called out, "Fellas, help me, I can't stop." And one of his friends called back, "Jacob Reed, what are you doing in the name of heaven?" And at the word heaven, Jacob was released. He fell to the ground. His friends ran up to him, pulled him to his feet, made sure he was all right. He was just exhausted. "Fellas, how did you know where to find me?" "Well," one of his friends said, your dog came home this morning without you, Jacob. We figure we better come looking for you. What happened?" "Fellers, if I told you, you'd never believe me. Let's go home." And that's what they did. Well, I don't think I have to tell you that experience changed Jacob Reed. After that, he left his dog just come home on its own, and he never, ever again questioned the ability of a fiddle player. I thank you for the listen.
Bravo. Oh, never question the ability of a fiddler player. My goodness. Thank you so much. That was
Thank you.
fantastic. Didn't I tell you, everybody? Another story. Oh my goodness. Well, I do have a toast. This has got to be one of the corniest toasts, but I love it. And it's just one of those toasts that never leaves this simple brain of mine. So raise your glasses of tomato juice, water, wine, whatever you might have. Here's to bread. For without bread, there would be no toast. I told you, corny. All right, we're going to go all the way over to Florida, where the weathermen are so bored because the weather just does not change that much. But we're going to go right to Jim Kissane for him to share a fabulous tale with us also. It's so nice to see him with us too. I'd love to hear his thoughts and his tales. He's fabulous. All right, Jim, you've got the stage.
Thank you. I'd like to share with you a historical story this evening. And it begins in 1968 at the front door of Grandma Heather's house. And her grandson is impatiently pacing back and forth, waiting for Grandma, who's 80 years old, to answer the door. And as she answers the door, she can see a very agitated young man. "Grandma, We need to talk. Well, come on in. I'll fix us a cup of tea. And as she escorted him back to the kitchen and then set out a couple of cups of tea and some scones, she said, tell me what's going on. Grandma, I've got this letter from General Motors. It says my 1966 Impala is being recalled by the factory. As a matter of fact, it's worse than that. The news says they're all being recalled. Grandma said, well, that's not so bad. What do you mean it's not so bad? It's being called the first industry-wide auto recall that's ever happened. Calm down. Let me tell you about the first one. I was actually there. Now she had her grandson's attention. I'd like to take you back to 1915. Times were quite different then, you know, and I was feeling pretty fortunate as a young woman. Now, I was 26 years old, but 3 years prior to that, I had lost your grandfather, my husband, and I was a widow with 2 young children at home, the oldest being your mother. And they were very dire times, hard for women to find any kind of work. But as I mentioned, I had been very fortunate because, you see, I had heard through one of my friends at church that Saul Stern was hiring seamstresses for his cushion factory. And at a potluck dinner, this kind lady, knowing my situation, personally introduced me to Mr. Stern, who, knowing that I, like most women at the time, had good sewing skills, but being compassionate to my situation, invited me to come over to his factory and take a job, which I did. Now, Saul Stern's was a significant manufacturer in New Orleans at the time. And one of the things that his factory did was they took and stuffed cushions and mattresses and like with Spanish moss. You know Spanish moss, you know, throughout the South. You can see it. It's draping down out of the trees, and it's found almost everywhere where there's water, and you oftentimes find it on the ground. And men that were called moss gatherers would go out through the bayous with big long poles, and they'd pull the moss down out of the trees. Good moss can be 4 to 5 feet in length. And other men would do the same thing on ground. And they'd bundle it all up and they'd take it home and they'd put it in their backyard and they'd hose it down and dry it off. And then they would take it over to Saul Stern's moss ginnery. And there it would be run through a couple of machines that would flatten it out and comb it. And then it would go to the part of the factory where we stuffed it in to cushions and mattresses and pillows and such. And it was a really good job. And this business had recently gotten a contract with the Ford Motor Company. Ford, who had been using things like cotton and horsehair for their seat cushions and their Model T automobiles, had heard that Spanish moss was a less expensive alternative. Now, the Model T was the first commercially produced automobile that was affordable for the common man. So that was a big thing. And Saul Stern had the contract. Times were very good indeed. Grandma, I never knew anything about that part of your life. Things were good, right? Well, unfortunately, as it worked out, it didn't last. You see, in 1915 in the fall, Ford ended up recalling 3 years of their Model Ts. And it was all because of seat cushions with Spanish moss in them. You see, any boy that's been raised in the South understands that you never pick up the Spanish moss that's just lying around, because it's full of these little red bugs called chiggers. And it is smaller than a head of a pin. And they're more irritating than being bitten by 100 mosquitoes. And apparently, these little red bugs were coming out of the seat cushions on these Model Ts and biting the behinds of the drivers and passengers. And it became such a big deal, Ford had to recall all of their Model Ts that had those cushions. Oh, Grandma, that's awful. Well, as you might guess, it resulted in Saul Stern losing his contract with the Ford Motor Company, and I ended up losing the only job that I had had as an adult. Oh, Grandma, that's terrible. Well, I just call it a listening experience, where I had been listening to all of these things that had been said about this automaker and that automaker. And these Ford people, they were always trying to come up with a better idea. And in fact, in later years, as I followed them in the newspapers and then on television, they even incorporated Ford has a better idea in their advertising campaign. But here's a lesson. Sometimes you find that even a better idea can come back and bite you in the ass. Thank you.
Absolutely great ending. Oh, we Texans cannot stand those chickers. Oh, they're terrible. They're in my backyard, in my front yard, and under my skin, and it stays under your skin for quite a while. I don't know about anyone else, but I had no idea about the moss being tucked into the seats. No idea. That was fabulous.
It was a multi-million-dollar industry back in the day. At that time, up until the 50s, there were about 58 moss mills in Florida alone, and throughout Florida and the Gulf states. That was a really big deal. It wasn't until the mid-1920s that somebody figured out if you boil the Spanish moss, it killed the bugs.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, with that said, I do believe we need to raise our glasses again, and I'm going to let Jamie Blount do the honors.
Okay. Well, this is a toast that my great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather, said many times. He came from England as an immigrant years ago. This is the toast that I think made him famous, if I may say so. This to the best years of my life, spent in the arms of another man's wife, my mother.
Wasn't sure where that was going. Cheers. Yes. Cheers. Yay. Thank you so much. All right. We do have another teller, Karen Archer, who is also our co-host and really helps out with so many everythings when it comes to San Antonio Storytellers. She is on our San Antonio Storytellers blog board, but she's also a board member on the Tejas Storytelling Association, offers just lots of wisdom with a big smile to go along with it. and she does everything 150%. And so we just love having her. And she has a story to tell. So Karen, go for it.
Well, my story ties back a little bit to some things we were talking about in the beginning of the evening. John talked to us about safety on the job. He alluded to that, and he has a great story about that. And it reminded me of another story that I have. And we were also this evening talking about the heat and the drought in Texas. And years ago, when I lived in Colorado, I was a water cop. We had a drought in Colorado, and I worked for a little water district, and I patrolled the district and spotted people who were watering their lawns when they weren't supposed to be, and wrote tickets for that. But I did that for 11 summers, and not every summer was in the middle of a drought. And so those times when we weren't in a drought, we were customer service. I was a friendly presence out in the district. And on the weekends, I drove around the district. And when people saw me, of course, they remembered, oh, yes, we're not supposed to water. And they would flag me down. If they had questions about water conservation or anything like that, then I could stop and chat with them. And I loved that job. Well, to go along with our friendly presence, we had white trucks. We drove white trucks, and the district preferred that we kept them as clean as possible. So we drove around, and the trucks that were utility trucks during the week, on the weekends, became our water conservation trucks. And they were pretty good vehicles, but there was one in particular that was a true utility truck. This truck had pipes and buckets and parts and all kinds of metal work-related junk in the back end. And I still remember going around a curve and hearing thump, 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 clatter as everything went to roll to one side. And then go around another curve, thump, 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 and everything would roll to the other side. It was annoying, but I got used to it. But in addition to this truck sounding like a utility truck, it looked like a utility truck. It had this rack on the back side of the cab of the truck, and that was actually mounted into the bed of the pickup. But it rose up behind the cab of the truck, and it was a large metal, heavy framed thing that was in the back there. And the parts that weren't rusted were white. Well, the result is when I was sitting inside the truck and looking through the rearview mirror, it reminded me of those old metal Venetian blinds. And I dubbed that big metal rack as the Venetian blinds. And I thought it probably served a purpose, actually, to keep some of that metal and junk from the bed of the truck going up through the cab. So it wasn't all bad. But anyway, like I said, they kind of wanted us to keep these trucks clean and keep up our friendly presence image in the water district. So one day when I was driving that old utility truck and I was fueling it up, and I thought, I think I'll run that truck through the car wash today. So there I was in the car wash, sitting there and not really doing anything or thinking about anything, when some movement caught my eye. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was the Venetian blinds rising straight up in the air, all by itself. I kind of looked around and was trying to figure out what happened. And I looked back, and about that time, the Venetian blinds stopped. And they were just hanging there, suspended in the air. And about this time, I noticed those two big bars that go down into the bed of the truck to anchor the Venetian blinds to the bed of the truck were just kind of free floating in the air. And that is about the time I was thinking about diving for the floorboards when all of a sudden, kabam! And that Venetian blinds came down. The truck kind of let out a shudder and then nothing. Well, the car wash merrily went along through its wash and rinse cycle and finished out its wash. And as soon as it did that, I drove out of the car wash and drove over to the side and parked and got out of the truck and looked around to see if there was any damage. Miraculously, those two posts landed right back down into the bed of the truck where they were supposed to be and anchored down the Venetian blinds to the truck again. I gave it some thought and looked back at the car wash, and what I figured out happened is when the rollers, those brushes, went over the top of the truck, they caught in the Venetian blinds, and as they were trying to propel themselves forward, they were lifting the Venetian blinds straight up. Well, resistance and weight finally won out, and that's when the Venetian blinds dropped back down into the truck. All was good. The truck was okay. I was okay. And the summer went along as summer should, smoothly. But I can tell you, I never washed that truck again.
Oh, one of those summers. Oh my goodness. Venetian blinds on a truck. Didn't know, did not know. And I never take my cars through a car wash because there's just a terrible, terrible bad luck that there's always one thing or another. So don't do it. Karen, I'm glad you got out of that free and clear and hopefully carried on with a great summer. Thank you so much. All right, we have one last teller, and I'm so glad Tim joined us. If you don't already know, Tim has a fabulous storytelling guild himself, and I hope everyone gets to join that also. That is the Doc Moore Storytelling Guild, and that's, I believe, the third Thursday of every month, unless it changes. And looks like Tim is at a baseball game as I speak, so I don't know. He may have to talk a little bit louder with all the cheering going on in the background. Who knows? But Tim, thank you for joining us, and please share a short story with us.
I've got one for you tonight. And before we do that, can you unmute everyone just for a minute or two? Is it
Everybody
possible?
unmute.
Everybody unmute yourself, because I'd like to sing what used to be sung at the seventh inning of every baseball game in America. And then after, I believe it was 911, George Bush was president, and we changed and we started singing God Bless America in the seventh inning. But those who are longtime sports fans, Jim Kissane, I'm sure you'll remember, back when we used to sing the seventh inning, it was totally different until it started. Now it's God Bless America. But in the old days,
Rusty.
I'll sing to get it started. Okay, it goes, take me out to the ball game. Okay. All right. It seems like enough people know it. You know it. So let's go. Here we go. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the ball. Buy me peanuts and cracker jacks. I don't care if I ever get back for its root for the Pirates. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3, like you're out at the old ball game. Okay, when I sing that song, when I think of that song, and I've just been, the reason I've been muting and I've been going, I'll be honest with you, back and forth, and the Astros are down 4-0. And then they scored while Jim was talking, and It's 4-1, but we've won 9 or something in a row. So I've been a fan back when I was raised in Pasadena area, South Houston High School. And my dad worked overseas for Brown and Root. He would come home 3 months every other year. And that was it. My mother had 5 kids, 4 boys, and my big sister, Bobby Jean. And Bobby Jean was not so much a big sister as she was a babysitter for the 4 boys. Bless her heart, Bobby Jean, everybody called her. And when my dad would come back, it was usually the summertime, and he would pick us up and take us to a ball game. We loved baseball. We would listen to it on the radio all the time and watch the few games on television. And it used to be the Houston Buffs. They were a minor league team, and he would take us. But on the way, if he was going to buy us any Cokes or popcorn or any of the things you love to eat if you're a kid at a ball game, we had to know who the starting pitcher was for the Houston Buffs, what his earned run average was, who the starting pitcher was for the opposing team, what his earned run average was, and we had to know every starter for the Houston Buffs and what their batting average was up to the day. Dad was serious about that. And we would recite it on the way to the ballpark. And, who knows if we had made a mistake and missed a batting average by 3 points or something, if Dad would have, I don't know, but man, he had us convinced. He knew it all. And it was wonderful. So I grew up, and then they became the Colt 45s. And now they're the Houston Astros. But it was a night. It was summertime. It was the evening. My brother had come back from Vietnam several years ago, and PTSD wasn't even a term that was used at the time, but he was never the same after he came back. It was very different. And he used to say some weekend, we were close. We were only 2 years apart. And he was a tough basketball player. He played at University of Houston. He played with a team that included Clyde Drexler and those famous basketball players. And he used to tell me when he got back from Nam, he would say, oh, he wrote me a letter from Nam, and he said, Tim O'Brien, The Things They Carry. He's a novelist, a short story writer, Tim O'Brien, and The Things They Carry is a very famous book. Jot that one down. The Things They Carry by Tim O'Brien. Tim O'Brien wrote many of these short stories when he was in Vietnam, serving in the military. And when Danny came back, we had both read the book, and he said, some weekend, I want us to just go away, just you and I, just go to some remote place. And all weekend, we can just talk about this book. I want us to do that. And I knew what that meant. It meant he wanted to share stories of what he had gone through that he never felt comfortable sharing with anyone else. So, Brother Danny. Brother Danny. Can anyone hear me now? Wave if you can. Okay. So when Danny grew older and had come back from Vietnam, he still had that feeling about him, that distance about him. And it was actually a weekend of a Texas storytelling conference that was in Houston years ago. And I was giving a workshop there. And the workshop was about to start. It was a 90-minute storytelling workshop at the Texas Storytelling Association conference. And I was just about to go into the room, and a phone rang. It was on the wall. A phone rang, and I thought, what is that? And someone answered it, and they said, Tingle, Tim. It was a telephone. I said, who is that? Who would know the number to call? What is this about? And I got the phone. And someone said, it took me the longest time to find you, but you need to know your brother Danny has drowned in his kayak. and the family is all getting together. And I said, where? And it was his wife. And she said, we're either getting together here at the house, but I haven't been able to reach everyone. Oh, people might be gathering together at Jeannie's house. It was my big sister, Bobby Jean. And they both lived on the outskirts of Houston. My brother and Jackie lived south of Houston, close to NASA, and big sister Bobby Jean lived on the other side of Houston, on the north side. So there I was to hang up, and we didn't have, we had to go to a pay phone to call in those days. And so I didn't know what to do. And finally I called my son and I said, Jacob, and he said, yes, I know, Dad, I know. And I said, Jacob, find out, just call Jackie and call Jeannie and find out when they decide where the family is getting together. And then I'll call you. I'll call you every 30 minutes. And then I can know, because I was in downtown Houston. I was 20 miles from one place, 20 miles from the other, where the whole family was getting together on the evening of my brother's death to grieve. My brother he loved kayaks. He loved kayaks. When he came back, he had a few friends from high school, and they would take the kayaks out, but Danny never liked to take it to a lake or someplace that was safe. When there were warnings that would go out that this river is too dangerous, no swimming, no boating on this river, it's too dangerous, because that's where he and his friends would take the kayak. And then the movie Deliverance came out with the kayak that was so dangerous on that river, and the kayak would go up and down on the waterfalls, the kayak. And that's where Danny and his friend rode. They survived the same river from the movie Deliverance. And it was months later during the summer when I got the phone call. He had been out on a dam near NASA. It was one of those hydroelectric dams where the water flows back and forth and the signs are up, no boating, no boating. And he was out there kayaking. And his kayak flipped over, according to a man who stood on the shore, who actually spoke at his funeral a week later. He said, I was there on the shore, and when his boat flipped over, he came up and he was floating and bobbing up and down first, and he had his life jacket on, life preserver. And I waved to him, and the man said, I had a phone, a portable phone, and I called emergency, and they were sending a helicopter, and I waved to him, and I pointed, and he waved back. And then for some reason, he took his life preserver off and flipped it and dove back down. And later, when I talked to his friend, he said that's one thing they teach, that if you're about to go to a waterfall or something really dangerous, if you dive low, sometimes the water swirls back and you'll be safe. But when he finally floated back up, 5 minutes later, he was face down. He was face down. And so there I was. I talked to someone and I said, can you give the work? They said, what do you mean, can I give the workshop? It's a 90-minute. I said, I have to go, please. And Elizabeth Ellis was there. And I told her what had happened. And she said, don't worry. And it was taken care of. And I drove to the first place I knew I could wait safely. I felt comfortable. I didn't have to pay for parking. I pulled up in the old Colt 45 ballpark, and they were having a game. And I went inside and I bought a ticket, and I went inside because there were phones there, and I called Jacob, my son, and he said, not yet, Dad, but call back every 15 minutes or so. So I would wait. And every half inning, I would call. And finally, the 7th inning, I gave a call, and my son said, we're meeting at Jeannie's, your sister's house. I said, thank you, Jacob. And I hung the phone up. It was the 7th inning. I was just about to leave. As I made my way down the concrete steps, everything paused. And I heard the song. And I climbed back the steps. Danny and I and my dad had loved baseball so much. And I looked out over that ballpark, and I started singing the song to honor my brother. Take me out to the ballpark. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the park. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never go back where it's root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. And I like to finish with a toast. I miss my big brother, Danny, and I still love Danny. Bless your heart, Danny, wherever you may be, and I'll never forget about you at the old ball game.
From the heart, beautiful. Thank you so much, Tim. We got to be part of that. Boy, I'm not sure if I'll ever think of that song the same way I had. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. So we do have one more toast, which I love too. Cheers to creating your own happily ever after.
Cheers. Cheers.
And you all, thank you so much. Before we go, I got pictures towards the end, but my responsibility failed toward the beginning because you all are just amazing storytellers. So I'm wondering, real quick before we sign off, if I could have a picture of Judi first. So John, if you wouldn't mind bringing Judi up front, and you guys can unmute and you guys can cheer Judi on while I take a picture of her. All right, Judi, look up. Here we go. Yay! There's Judi. Yay. And if I can get Veronica next.
I don't know. Can you?
Yep, there you are. Veronica, look up to your camera. There you go. There you go. Thank you. And let's see if I can get John. John Hale, can you go ahead and come up front row center? There you go. Great one. Thank you, John. And I believe I got everybody else. So yay. Best stories in the world. You all have been recorded. Once the YouTube is edited, you'll be able to see it within the day or so. But thank you all. Happy July. You know, we don't ever have a theme. Maybe sometimes we do, but definitely for July we did not, because 4th of July and Declaration and freedom. I thought, yeah, that means everyone can share a tale. And this was just so perfect. Cheers to the best stories ever. They get us through every moment in life. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope to see you next month. We meet the first Wednesday of each month. Tim Tingle, he has his the third Thursday of each month, the Doc Moore Storytelling Club. And you got to see Sue Young's the books that she was talking about and where she's going to be this coming Friday. So I hope everyone gets a chance to look at the chat. Feel free to go ahead and copy it. You can go to the 3 dots by the chat and you can save your chat if you'd like. So, all right. Thank you all so much. We'll see you later.
Stay well.
Everyone stay well. Yes. Yes.
Night all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Jim, thank you so much for being here. And Judi, thank you so much. You're awesome. Veronica, we love that story of the Queen. Tim, I learned a little bit more about your brother. Very, very cool. I knew a little bit, but it's so nice to hear you tell a story.